Alright, so in this video we're going to go over sort of guidelines for how to ADA a lesson and articulate. So first of all, just kind of the big overarching idea of what you're doing. We ADA these lessons for the benefit of mainly someone who is blind or can't see well and is using a screen reader. So the screen reader in general just kind of reads through different elements of whatever, a website or a Word document or something like this. So the main idea is that the screen reader, or the person reading the screen reader, is going to be tabbing through different elements of the slide. So by elements of the slide, I mean, so here like we have the title, here we have this lady, blackboard, text box. Every single one of these is going to get tabbed through. And we don't see the menu here, but even the menu gets tabbed through. So basically, if it's something important to the content of the slide, we want the screen reader to read that. But if it's something that's not important to the content of the slide, like maybe this background image here or this lady, then we want to turn that off so that the screen reader doesn't get too bogged down. So that's the main idea, but of course it gets a lot more complicated than that. So the first thing I want to show everyone how to do is what I call turning off the background stuff. So every slide kind of has some background pieces that you don't really see here, but if you go to View and then go to Slide Master, we can see these background things here. So anything that says, it's mainly these round same side corner and rectangles, you want to make sure these are turned off to the screen reader, because otherwise it will read them and it's really annoying. So to do that, and this is the same way you turn off anything, and there's several different ways you can get to this menu, but you can go to Format, and then in this size box there's this little drop down arrow, go to Alt Text, and then make sure this is unclicked. You'll probably find that a lot of it's already unclicked, especially if you're recycling the same slides over and over again, but it's always good to check because sometimes there will be some that get missed. So I just want to make sure that both of these are unchecked. Okay, so to get back, I go to View and Normal. Okay, so for this particular slide, kind of the things I'm looking for is one, that there's nothing in these text boxes that includes any sort of mathematical text. In those cases, I would need to do what's called alt text, and I'll show you how to do that in just a second. But that's one thing I'm looking for. But for this slide, this is just normal text. These are just normal words that the screen reader can read just fine. So then the other things I need to be worried about are describing any images that I want the screen reader to see, and then turning off anything that I don't. There are a few different ways you can do this. You can kind of just go through the slide kind of in a linear order from top to bottom, and that's completely fine, but I really suggest, at least at the end, going through down here on the bottom, because otherwise you might miss something small. So, for example, if I wanted to see the alt text for this text box, I would go to Format, same place, size, drop down arrow. This says it's visible, which I want it visible to the screen reader. There's no alt text, which is fine. I don't need any alternative text because this is just normal. I can read this. But then basically I'm just going to go through all of these piece by piece. So that one's fine. It's just a normal text box. Okay, this picture, this is important to the content of the slide, so I want to describe it to the blind person or whoever might be using this, and we already have a little description here. So if you want an alternative description on anything, whether it's an image or a text box, it's going to be typed here. So it says this is the image of a curve approximated by a series of small straight line segments. And so when the screen reader tabs, that's what it will read, instead of just saying picture 1, for example. Okay, so now I come to this female 3 talking expression, one hand hip, one hand out, which it would read all of that if the screen reader came across that. So this has already been done, but I want this to be unchecked. Okay, so most of these slides actually have already been ADA'd. So yeah, this is unchecked, which means the screen reader won't see it at all, and that's good. Same thing with this thing that says shape 1. This is this blackboard. I want that to be turned off. And then this is the title, which is fine. I want it to read this title. Big idea arc link. There's nothing funny there that I need to alt text. Okay, so that's that slide. I'm starting simple, and then we're going to kind of get into more and more complicated slides. But this is a really simple, straightforward slide. Any questions, Neil?
No, it's okay.
Okay. All right, so this one is also pretty simple. Pretty simple slide overall, so we can kind of do the same thing. You would, of course, want to make sure all the background stuff is turned off. You can do that the same way we did before. Just check this round same side corner is off. And again, I'm just going to kind of go through this down here just to make sure I catch all the elements. Now on this particular slide, I have all these kind of background words, but they're just kind of decorative. They're not really critical to the content of the slide, so I'm going to turn off all those words. So I can do that once again, just from the same box. I want to make sure all these are unchecked for all these little words that I see in the background here. Once again, just because they're not important to the overall point of the slide, they're just decorative. Okay, then we come to a button. Now buttons, I usually like to make them say click to go or click to do whatever. When the screen reader reads it, otherwise in this case it would, I guess, just read this URL and then say button, which would be kind of strange. So instead I've made this alt text that makes it say click to go to a website with 1151 online lessons. So often with buttons it's going to be helpful to have an alt text so that the student knows very clearly what that is that they're seeing on the slide. So we've got that button taken care of then. We've got this text box up here, which there doesn't look like there's anything too strange there. So alt text maybe isn't necessary there, but yeah, OSU could be funky. Yeah, so you just want to be careful with abbreviations and kind of weird stuff. Yeah, so separating that OSU maybe is helpful there for the screen reader. Okay, so then what else do we have on the slide? We have the title, which is good, and then we have this shape here, this laptop. I don't want them to see that. That's not critical to the content of the slide at all. So once again, that's another pretty simple slide to get us started with. Okay, so here's another fairly straightforward one. So what's going on in this slide? Well, I have, this is an example slide. Basically what's going to happen is when the student clicks on one of these, it's going to link them to a video. So yeah, one thing I should mention is you always want to kind of take into account the point of the slide when you're doing the alt text. So here, well, I've got this text box up here. That's fine. That's pretty straightforward. I don't need any alt text there. But down here I have both an image and then a text box. And you can't see this here because I've taken it out of the lesson. These aren't actually linked to anything. But in the actual lesson, both the picture and the text box are linked to the video slide. But the student doesn't need to hear that twice, right? They don't need to click the Petri dish and here, click to see a video example, and then here again, video example. So either we can put the alt text on either one of these. So I think, I want to say it's on this Petri dish. Yeah, so the Petri dish already has this alt text that Neil wrote. Click here to watch a video example of the growth of bacteria, which is perfectly fine. But then what I would do is I would turn off this text box, or vice versa. You can have the text box on and the image off. And same thing with the milk. The milk already says click here to watch a video example of inflation and the cost of milk, so I am going to turn off the text box. And then once again, just scroll through down here, make sure we didn't miss any little pieces, but it looks like we got everything there. Okay, good on that one? Okay. Okay, so then these next few are, the point of these next few slides I picked out are to point out that we want to keep an eye out for text boxes that need alt text, which seems kind of strange that you would need to do that. But anytime you have mathematical notation in a text box, you're going to want to write an alt text. Otherwise, the screen reader is going to read find lengths of curves y equal f open paren, I think it says x close paren, and it's just not going to probably be very understandable for the student. So we can get to the alt text once again in the same way. So it's already got some, and so what's happened here is we've kept this computational goals, and the easiest thing to do in this case is just to copy this and paste it in this alt text box and then just change the pieces that need to be changed. But anyway, what we've made it say is find lengths of curves y equals f of x. So we've written out f of x, just the way someone would read it, and x equals g of y. Now you notice here we put all our variables in capital letters. That's kind of just something I always do because you'll notice if you have lowercase letters, it underlines them like it's a mistake. So to be honest, I'm not quite sure how the screen reader would read that. So I always capitalize it just to be safe. And you could have things like an A, which it might read as ah instead of A. So I just always use capital letters for the variables. And then once again on this slide, we would want to make sure that the lady is turned off, which she is, and then this background shape is turned off. So yeah, just always, and something else, I mean, mathematical notation isn't the only thing. You could have like a second fundamental theorem of calculus. You would want to do alt text and write out second because it's obviously not going to be able to read that. So just keep a lookout for things like that. Same thing here. Even in titles, if you want the screen reader to be able to read it, you would want to make an alt text for this little title here. So arc length for y equals f of x. Okay, so now we're going to get into slightly more complicated, but still not too bad. So here's a quiz, and once again, I can look down at the bottom here to see all my different elements, what's going on. I have this title, that's fine. There's nothing weird in the title that the screen reader couldn't read. And then I have this text box here. This is fine as well. But then I get to my answers, and these all have mathematical notation in them. So I'm going to want to do alt text for each of these answers. And the way I can do that is just, I can actually select each of these answers. And once again, it's the same as it always is. I come to this alt text box. Now, I actually don't want this option A in here, and we'll talk more about situations in which you would put that in a second. But so here I've made it, or Neil has made it say the domain of y equals e to the x power is the open interval from 0 to infinity. And same with all these other ones. So just watch out even on quizzes for alt text. Now something else a little tricky about quizzes is that after the student enters their answer, they're going to be told if they're correct or incorrect. And oftentimes we have mathematical notation in this pop-up box. So that's another thing you want to watch out for. You can do alt text within those as well, the same way. So you just want to make sure that you describe that mathematical notation out longhand in words for quizzes as well. All right, so I think that's it for quizzes. You still good? Can you think of anything else? Okay. Okay. All right, so moving on. Okay, so I think I just put this one in here to do another reminder about buttons. Well, these actually aren't even buttons. These are pictures, but they act as buttons because when you click them, they link you to other slides. So you just want to give them an appropriate alt text. So for example, Neil has written on this one, click to watch an explanation of d over dx of ln of parentheses. Parentheses are fine to use. In the alt text, it will read that as open paren, which I think is fine, of open parentheses 2 plus ln of x close parentheses. You do want to make sure to use parentheses as appropriate in your alt text, just to make it really clear to the student. You know, if there's like a quantity in the denominator, or in this case there's a quantity inside the natural log, just to make it really clear to them what the math actually is. So all of these should then have a click to watch such and such, and they do. And then the rest I have this text box, that's fine, nothing weird there. Title, nothing weird there. So the slide is good to go then. Okay, so now we're starting to get into the slides that are a little bit more complicated. So there's a lot going on this slide here. And as we get into these later slides, we're going to have to start thinking about kind of the overall structure of the slide and how it's read by someone who can see, and how we might translate that for someone who can't see. So let's kind of just go through these piece by piece. So I have this formula here. Let's see, let me pull up the alt text for this. Okay, yeah. Okay, so what we've done on this one, and with all of these, there's always different ways you can do the slides. But what we've done on this one is, since this text box is meant to be read along with these formulas, right? It says for revolutions around the y-axis, blah, 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 is given by this formula. So we basically put the alt text for the formulas in with a text box, so it's all read as one piece. And maybe the reader doesn't get quite, or the student doesn't get quite as lost having to tab between these and then the idea getting broken up. So basically the shell method is given by, and then we've written out this formula, v equals the limit as n goes to infinity of the sum, and then even the next formula, this equals the definite integral from a to b, and then we describe this integral. And then, since we've done that, what we want to make sure to do is turn off this formula and turn off this formula as well. So that's kind of one thing that's going on in this slide. And then another big thing is we have this picture down here, which we describe that graph as well. When you're describing graphs like this, you want to include as much detail as is needed to get the point across, but not extraneous details. So what you describe is going to be kind of dependent on the point you're trying to get across on the slide. And then with slides like this that are more complicated, it's even more important to make sure you go through all these elements down here and really make sure that you've turned off what should be turned off and left on what should be left on. Now, the reason I actually put this slide in here is because of this marker. If we look at this marker, it's got mathematical notation in it that we're going to need to alt text. But there's some sort of weird glitch in, I don't know if it's a glitch really, but I have not ever been able to find a way to get to the alt text in the normal way for markers. Like, it just doesn't come up. But you can kind of trick it. If down here I go, for example, to this picture, pull up the alt text, then click on the marker, then it'll pull up this little box here. And so, once again, just something else to look out for is to look out for those markers and make sure that you give them alt text as needed. So then, yeah, let's just make sure we got everything. So we got the marker, we got this picture turned off, which is good, and this is off. and then that information is contained in this text box. Picture is described in this title. We've just included this because of this Y, just to make sure it reads that appropriately. We've capitalized it. Maybe that's something you can play around with when you, yeah, see, because I haven't done that in forever. I don't know if it would read it as Y, even if it's not capitalized. Okay, questions about that slide? Okay. Okay, so let's see what I wanted to point out here. Okay, so this is not too complicated. I think the reason I included this, oh yes. Okay, so I've got this picture down here, and you can't see it from here, but this picture is actually made up of lots of lines and letters and rectangles that were created in Articulate. So I could actually, if I wanted to, press, there's a button, I could press this ungroup button right here, and then you would see all the lines that make this up. But there's some sort of weird glitch that when you group things, it will not read the alt text for it, or at least that was the case in previous versions of Articulate. I don't know if that's been fixed. So basically, whenever I have a group, I always turn it off and include that description along with something else. So let's go through and see what's going on here. Okay, so it looks like in this particular slide, we've just described everything as alt text on this text box. So we have the original text. To find the exact area under a curve, we take the limit of the area of the rectangle, so this gives us an integral. And then we describe this formula here. And this is actually good because this formula's got lots of different pieces on it that you'd want to describe. So it says specifically the definite integral from a to b of f of x dx, and then we describe this height and width here. It says where f of x represents the height and dx the width. Okay, and then that equals the limit as n goes to infinity. Okay, so basically we describe not only the formula but all these little pieces that go with it. And then we've also put in the picture in this alt text. So below this formula is an illustration, and so on. So we've included everything there. There's this button for review video. The alt text says click for a video reviewing where this formula comes from. But then we've turned off this picture here since we already described it above. This is just the title. And then we've turned off this picture here as well, since once again we've already described it above. Good on that one? Okay. Okay, and once again, I'm including this slide to show you another little glitch. Anything with a zoom button, right? You can add these zoom buttons to pictures, and if you actually go to this, oops, that's not what I want to do. If you actually look at the slide, it allows you to just zoom in on that picture. But once again, there's some sort of glitch, or at least there used to be, where it won't read alt text for things that have a zoom on them. So once again, you just have to include those descriptions somewhere else. And in this case, I believe we probably included them all with this image here. Yeah. So the alt text on this image includes not only the information for this image, but also the information for these other images. And then, in turn, those other images are all turned off to the screen reader. So yeah, the groups have a little glitch, and the little zoomed images have a glitch where for some reason it doesn't like to see those. So just keep those in mind. Okay. Okay, so here we have another quiz. And the reason I'm doing this one is what I have is, or the way this is constructed is I have this text box, but this here, this integral is actually an image. Articulate doesn't have math type in it, so what you have to do is take an image from somewhere else and just insert it. Um, Now, if I didn't, well, okay, so if I described the text box and the formula separately, what's going to happen is the screen reader is going to read the text box, and then separately, it's going to read the alt text for this image, whatever that may be, because they are actually separate items on the slide. But that would be kind of confusing for the student because this is meant to be read as a single thing, right? To the student who can see, this is just inserted in this whole, I don't know, thing here. So we just want to take that into account when we do our alt text. So basically, I think what we did on this one is we have alt text for this text box. It does have mathematical notation in it that we need to take care of. And then I've just included the description of the integral in with that alt text there for that text box. And then in turn, I've turned that image off. So that's the main point on this slide that I wanted to point out. And once again, just quizzes, just make sure to check these pop-up boxes here. There is nothing that needed any alt text. You good on that? So yeah, if there's a formula with in text, that's really important. And this is just another example of the same thing, just to show you what that might look like in another case. Once again, this formula is kind of meant to be read within this text, as opposed to the screen reader reading the text and then later coming back and reading just this image on its own. So basically when we did the alt text for this text box, we just included this mathematical notation within it in the appropriate place, and then we turned off this image here. And then of course we've got other things going on here. This image at the top needs an alt text. Even this little text box needs an alt text as well because of this natural log of x. Okay. So there's one more thing on this slide that's a little bit complicated, but I'll go ahead and point it out. If you read this point 1, it says, as we noted in the derivative section, and then in parentheses here it says, click here to review. And this is probably a little hard to even know that it's there, but that is actually a link. I've put a rectangle, you can see it down here where it says rectangle 1. I've actually put a rectangle over that and made that, when you click it, it links to another slide, but it's actually the rectangle itself that's clicking. And I worked on this in the lesson that this came from, and the way I got around this, because it doesn't really make sense probably to say click here to review within this text box because they can't actually click there. So I think what I made it say was made it say like click button to review, just letting them know that there was a button. So like I made this say click button to review, and then on that rectangle I made an alt text that said click to review the derivative of the natural log of x. So that way it makes maybe a little more sense. So that's the way I took care of that in this case. Okay, so let's make sure there's nothing else weird down here. So the rectangle, yeah, we made that a click to such and such. This is turned off. It should be turned off. Good. We have alt text there, and there, and that's just a title. Okay. All right, so on this slide, the reason I included this one is for the sake of this graph here. So this graph is a picture that I've just copied and pasted here, but this y equals 3 to the x and y equals 4 minus x are actually little text boxes that I've just kind of put on top. So what I would want to do for this image here is when you described this, you included these labels within your description for the picture. So that then what you want to remember to do is turn them off otherwise. And they already are here, of course, but so just make sure that both that label and this label are turned off, because otherwise it's reading it twice. So that's the main point of this slide, is just to point that out. Okay, so on this slide there's a good bit going on in terms of graphics. We've got kind of this background picture of the graph, but then there's this inset on the top, and then there's these also these lines and circles that are actually created in Articulate. So if we kind of just go through these different elements, we have, of course, an alt text on this text box up here because it has this math notation, as we've already talked about a lot. But then what we've done here is we've just included the alt text for this entire picture on this image here. So this describes this entire image. So then what you have to be careful to do is, once again, just look down here and make sure you get all these little lines and all these little ovals, and turn that off. And then also turn off this image that we did use. Okay, so that's that, which I think you kind of are good with that by now. It seems like I was looking at some of your 7.3 slides, and it seems like you've got that down. Okay, so this is a slide that's a good example of kind of thinking about sort of the overall structure of the slide. So this stuff up here at the top is pretty straightforward, right? I just got this text box and this image. They can just be described as is. But down here I have this formula, and then I have these arrows, which these are just arrows created in Articulate, so they're actually elements of the slide. They're not part of this image. These arrows and then these little explanations coming from this picture. Now, if we just left these as is, oh, and then I've even got these markers, right? So it's even more complicated, really. But if I just left this as is, what would happen is the screen reader would read this picture, whatever the alt text might be, and then it would read this: integral bounds are x values, top function, bottom function. But that would be kind of meaningless without being able to see what's going on here. So what did we do exactly? Yes, so what I think Neil or whoever did this slide did, I don't remember, but we just included in this text box here, and you could do this anywhere. You could do it with this text box, you could do it with this formula, it doesn't really matter. We put it up here. We included the description of this formula. So let's see, it looks like it starts, oh yeah, I see why we did this, because it says then the area of the region between the graphs of f and g on the interval AB is given by, and then we just kind of continue our train of thought and describe this formula. So if you look over at this alt text, given by, and then there's this integral described, a equals a definite integral, so on and so on. And then we describe what's being, visually represented by all this. Here the integral bounds are x values, f of x represents a top function, and so on. And we actually even include what's in these markers in there as well, so that everything's just in one place the way it would be for someone who's looking at it. And then all these things, the formula, the text boxes, the arrows, and the markers, since we described them up here, all of those are turned off. So when you have complicated slides like this, everyone is different, and you just kind of have to think about the best way, or the most efficient way to kind of chunk it all together so that it makes sense to someone who's just tabbing through it. Okay, so that's a good one. Okay, so this is a really common scenario. Once again, because Articulate doesn't have math type, any way to type math or complicated math formulas. In a quiz, if your answer choices are mathematical formulas, then you have to use images. So these are actually images, and if I kind of move them over, you can see that underneath I have a. Um, Maybe this would make more sense if I showed you this first. So this is where you actually create the multiple choice question. And you can edit it more out here, but basically you enter the, oops, I can't see this. So basically you enter the question up here, and then your choices down here. Because my choices are just images, I just put A, B, C, D, and then I choose the right one. And there's this option to shuffle the answers or not. Now this is really important. It's not, I guess, relevant to ADA, but it is really important. If you are using images for your answer choices, you want to have this to not shuffle. Because otherwise, underneath those images, it's going to shuffle, so the student's going to choose what they think is C, but the computer thinks it's B, and so they get it wrong, and it's just confusing. So anyway, it's just a free piece of information there. But anyway, so these aren't shuffling, so kind of underneath these are these A, B, C, D. Okay, so there are a few different ways you could approach this, but the way I've started doing it, which I think is probably the most efficient actually, is to, so here we're asking which integral gives the area of the shaded region, and there's an alt text on this box that says, first of all, which integral gives the area of the shaded region, and then it actually goes ahead and describes the graph there as well. That graph is turned off and it's described here. So we have this description of the graph shown as the image of a graph, blah, 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 blah. Okay, and then what I've actually done is I've went ahead and included the answer choices up here in this alt text, so they just kind of hear it all at the beginning. So it says choice A is such and such, choice B is such and such, and so on, and describes all these. And then I have these images turned off. And the reason I thought that might be more efficient is because I'm really not sure what order, how this is going to tab through, right? Because these are kind of overlaying these. So it might say like choice A, it might go through these images first, and then through the multiple choice, it'll say like button A, button B. Or I don't know if it would read this and then say button A, but if they're just included up here, then they can hear all the choices. And then the next thing they'll hear is button A, button B, click to select, so I think that's probably the most efficient way to handle it if there's image choices like that. And then, of course, just remember to turn all of these guys off, which I think they already are off. Yeah, all these are off. Yeah, and then this multiple choice underneath, just don't do anything with that. It'll just read out the choices. Does that make sense? Okay. And then once again, just make sure you always get these, which you always do. But okay, so that's the quiz with images as choices. Oh, and you'd want to turn off these guys as well. Okay. So one more quiz to look at. Okay, yeah, I wanted to show this one because we've seen some multiple choice quizzes so far, but we haven't really looked at any fill in the blank choices. Fill in the blank quizzes. So here, let's see, we have a alt text here, right, because we have this kind of strange notation here, this T sub 2. And then we describe the formula, so that's all pretty normal. But then what we have down here is we kind of have a lot of different pieces going on. So what I typically do is I turn off this piece here, which is not turned off yet, and I would turn off this piece here, and then here I would say something like, so I would say type your answer here, that's pretty standard, but then I would maybe expand, type a value for T sub 2, or something like that, just taking care of that. And then this should say like click to submit. That's pretty much it. So, and then just turn these guys off. And then you can check these as usual as well. Okay. Does that one make sense? All right. Okay, now we get into the hard stuff, the complicated stuff. Okay, so this is a complicated slide in some ways. So if I just kind of start at the top here, I've got this text box, which would need alt text, of course. But then I've got this, basically this proof here. And this is an image. I just wrote this in Smart Notebook and copy and pasted it. But then there's all this stuff overlaying it. Actually, these little rectangles are overlaying it. So we'd want to turn those off, of course. But kind of the main thing I wanted to point out here are these markers. So you've seen how to put alt text on markers before. But this slide's a little different because what a student who can see is going to be doing is they're going to read this line and they're going to say, oh, there's a marker, let me click it, and then they're going to read it in association with reading this line of the proof. But what's going to happen with the screen reader is because these are different elements, right? These markers are actually on top of the image. They're not embedded in it or anything. They're not going to be together. So I don't know what order it would do it in, but it would read the image, and then maybe later it'd go back through these markers. But that's not really going to be that meaningful because the markers are actually referring to lines in the text. Okay, so what you would probably want to do in this case is actually just take whatever these markers say. So I would go, so yeah, let's open the alt text for this image here. And then I'm going to take whatever this marker says, which it says in this step we used such and such property. Copy that, and then I'm going to go back to the alt text here. And then I'm just going to paste it at the appropriate place in that picture so that it comes after that line and just there's kind of like a flow to it. You can just paste it in this alt text you've already done. And same thing with all these other markers, right? So you can copy this and go back here, paste it in the appropriate spot, and do that for all these markers. And then after you do that, I would just go through, as always, I haven't done this for every slide that I've shown you, of course, but when you're actually doing this, you always want to, again, go through this list down here and make sure you've caught everything. Like in this one, for example, there's these two little slash lines that you probably would never notice unless you went through here. But, turn those off because they're described in the image. Turn off all the markers in this case because we described those as part of the image. And so on. Turn off the rectangles and anything else like that. So that one's more complicated, is it? Yeah. Okay, good. Okay, this one actually isn't as bad, and you actually alt texted this a long time ago and did it a perfect way. So what we have here, or the thing that's interesting here, is this table. And of course, if you didn't do anything to this, it'd be completely meaningless because you'd have lines and X's, and who would know where they would go if you were just listening to the screen reader read it. So it doesn't matter what you can pick any of these elements. I forget where you. Yeah, that's fine. You can pick any of these. Yeah, he put it under this variable of integration text box. He described this table here. And then he went through so probably in this list is the most efficient way to do it, and turned off every single one of these elements down here. You could even maybe make that a group and turn it off all in one step. That might be more efficient. But anyway, so things like that you want to look out for. And the rest of the slide's pretty straightforward. Okay, so now we get into the fun part, which is layers. Okay, so Articulate has layers, which are cool, right? They look cool sometimes. This one's not really that exciting. It kind of just looks like a new slide. But like, for example, this guy. I click show height, and this new thing comes up, show circumference. So you can do kind of some fun stuff with the layers. But layers are extremely painful for the screen reader. It like, I don't know, it's kind of hard to explain. It's just a mess. Like so let's say you tried to open a new layer, and then the screen reader would have to re-tab through all the menu stuff before it even got to the new layer. And then sometimes it like reads the bottom, like what's underneath as well. So it's just a mess. It doesn't work well ever. For the screen reader to try and go through the layers, it's extremely cumbersome and painful. So what I try to do is try to, if at all possible, bypass layers. And this is the thing that's new to you. So the way you would do that would be different for every slide. The way I did this here is, let's see, I don't remember. So first of all, what's going on here is I have these text, and they're kind of interrupted by these images, these formula images. So of course I have described the images within this alt text here. And then I think what I did, so up until this point in the alt text, it's this page right here. And then this next page, or this next layer, is just more of the same proof. So basically I just described this in with this description. So this keeps going. So it says, we now have a Riemann sum, blah, 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 which is all the stuff from the next slide. And then you just turn this button off, so they never even see it, right? So it's just, for this slide, just one long narrative that includes all the layers. So that's one option that you'll probably use a lot. Does that make sense? Okay. So let me show you some other layers. Okay. Yeah, the kind of annoying thing about that is that it kind of takes away the option, right? Because like on this one, click to see an explanation. Well, maybe they wouldn't want to, but they kind of have to. But I think it's better than, once you play around with JAWS, you'll maybe see how annoying it is. If you actually try to go through a layer, you can play around with it. But it's really bad. So I think it's probably better just to do it this way. But anyway, so on this slide, what happens is, let's see, it asks them to think about an example, and then they can click to see an explanation, and this just little pop-up box comes up, which is kind of cool visually. I mean, it's really cool. But once again, it's not going to be cool to the person using the screen reader. So I think, well, let me see what I did here. Yeah, so basically I just explained what is in this box within this text box here. And I don't think I even said, think about this example and then ... because that doesn't really make sense if you're not going to click the button. So I just, explained, or wrote what that says here, and then turned off this link here. So, yeah, that's another layer example. Now this one is a lot of layers. There's like a bajillion of them. So this would be an absolute mess for the screen reader. So once again here, I think I just did a long narrative of everything from all the slides just on this image or wherever. Turned this off so they never see it. So yeah. There's some that are a little more complicated. this one's a little bit more complicated. So what's going on here? This is a quiz solution. So it says the general formula for the shell method around a vertical axis is given by this formula, right? So this is all one text box, and it's got this formula stuck in the middle, where r of x is the radius of a shell and h of x is the height. Okay, then it says click on reveal r of x and reveal h of x below to show these on the graph. And this is a pretty cool slide. So if they click reveal r of x, you got this little pop-up, that tells them about it and shows it on the graph. And then if they click h of x, the same thing. And right, there's all these different little pieces that pop up, like this formula and this line and this box here. But once again, we want to bypass the layers for the screen reader. So what I did here is, once again, I just described everything in this text box. What did I do? Okay, so backing up, what I did here is I have this text box described, and of course this formula is included in the text and the formula is turned off. But I left out this part about clicking on reveal r of x and h of x because they're not actually going to do that. So that's just kind of an example where you have to be just thoughtful and just think about the whole slide and all the stuff that's going on here. And then I actually, on this graph, the graph is described, but then the stuff from the reveal r of x and the reveal h of x is just included in here. So I'm not sure exactly where it starts, but r of x is the distance from the axis of rotation, so it's all just described in here. All the stuff that they would see when they click those buttons, and then these buttons once again are just turned off. And then on this slide as well, there's all these other little things you have to turn off. So once again, this is another good example of just always making sure you scroll through down here, like these y's and x's and formulas and rectangles and all these other little pieces. So does that one make sense? Okay. Good. Okay. So here's another example for layers, of layers. So on this slide, we're showing some special properties of this function. So there's properties, and then this first one, it says click for pop-up proof. And if you click that, then this little pop-up box pops up and shows you the proof, and then you can close it. But once again, we want to bypass that. And I don't have it on this slide, though I did it in the actual lesson. But what I did is I just included it in this text box. So it says this, and then I said something like, consider the following proof. And then I just, took the alt text that you had written, copy and pasted it, and associated it with this, and then turned off this text box. And same thing down here. There's also this click for pop-up proof, which is its own separate text box, which is nice. So yeah, I just did alt text here, and then at the end here I would go to your proof, and you already written alt text. I would just copy and paste that, bring it back, and maybe write some few transition words. Here's the proof, there it is, and then turn off this so that they don't get into those layers. Yeah, so I guess you're kind of getting the idea of the layers. Yeah, that's all the layer ones I have. So does that make sense? Yeah, the idea makes sense. It's just like every slide is different. It's kind of fun in a way. So you're kind of just trying to figure out the best place to include the information, but in most cases, you can always find some sort of way to bypass those layers, even though it's probably not as cool, but what are you going to do? So there's just one more slide, and this is an example of layers that is very strange. It's cool, but Elizabeth made these little pop-up videos, which is a cool idea. I don't like it because it's so hard for the screen reader. So Elizabeth, if you're watching this, no more pop-up videos, please. But anyway, because the problem is that video is a link So we can't bypass the layers in the way we would have before. It's not just, there's not just a proof there that I can describe in this text box. So, but that would be such a pain in the butt, because I don't even know what the screen reader would do, because they're trying to get to this anyway to play it in a new window. So it's just a mess. So what I did, and you can't, I created these secret buttons that are invisible to you, but they are there. So, and this just actually, I guess you had to know a little bit about just articulate to do this. And I can show you again if you ever have to do this. But I create whenever you create a button. So let me create a button here to show you what I mean. So let's just put a button on here. So this is button. If I highlight it, I see over here it's button 5, and I can add a trigger, and there's all these different things you can do: show layer, hide layer, jump to slide. But you can jump to a URL. So that's what I did. I made these invisible buttons, and they just jump directly to whatever this video URL is. So right there's this button, and you can see over here it jumps to a YouTube video URL, and the alt text just says, click to see the washer solution, video will open in a new window. And then these guys are turned off completely. So that was the kind of way I had to get around those pop-up videos, which works, but it's kind of weird. So I try to avoid pop-up videos if at all possible. But yeah, that's pretty much it. So I guess this summary is just that you have to just be really thoughtful, and thoughtful as far as like how you're constructing the things, and then also just really thorough, right? Because you're trying to make sure that I mean, if you miss one every once in a while, no big deal, but like the goal is for them not to get bogged down and all this stuff that's not going to make any sense at all. So, just do your best to always check those. All right, I will stop this unless you have any other questions.